After losing his corporate job for exposing the company's unethical business practices, a desperate man begins impregnating women for money. One morning, Veda buys his usual order of 4 coffees from a vendor in front of the Progea pharmaceutical firm building. Later, he hands the coffees to Millie, a secretary who then gives 1 cup to her boss, Jack Armstrong, vice president of the company. The executive heads to Dr. Schiller's office and the colleague says he was just thinking about their newest vaccine, Prexilin. Then, the scientist asks the man if he's married, and Jack says he isn't, but he believes the perfect age to do so is 31, because a person's young enough to play with his children but old enough to provide for his family. Even though he's already 30 years old, he's not sure if he ever wants to get married or have kids. However, Dr. Schiller says he needs to have as many children as he can afford because he might realize too late that focusing on his career is all for nothing. After leaving the office, Jack can't shake the ominous feeling he had hearing the scientist's words. Meanwhile, the troubled Dr. Schiller jumps out of the window and lands on the coffee cart, killing not only himself but the innocent vendor as well. The executive runs back to the room but realizes he's too late when he sees the gruesome scene on the street below. Later, the man talks to his colleague Margot, who doesn't seem distraught over the scientist's death because she's more concerned that the Food and Drug Administration, or FDA, is rejecting Prexilin. That evening, the woman tells Jack that the police believe Dr. Schiller took his own life. She warns that things are only going to get worse because the incident is getting worldwide press, and their boss, Leland Powell, is flying in from Europe tomorrow. While sitting in his office, the executive hears a noise and follows it to a small room. Inside, he sees Jimmy and other unfamiliar men shredding papers. Furious, he asks the employees what they're doing, but they disregard his authority and toss him out of the room. Jack returns to his office and sees a nondescript package someone left on the table. Inside, he finds Dr. Schiller's photo album containing images of the man's eventful life and a DVD tape to the last page. Later that night, the executive watches the video where the scientist reveals that Leland Powell, the newly appointed CEO, tipped his partner about the FDA rejecting Prexilin and they cashed out $350 million in company stock. Dr. Schiller knew the right thing to do was to call the ethics commission, but acknowledged he was too scared to be a whistleblower. The next day, Jack arrives at the meeting with Leland just as it ends, so Margot says she'll get him up to speed in her office. The woman knows that he saw the men shredding documents last night and says that the CEO is locking down everyone's retirement savings plans. She adds that until further notice, employees won't be permitted to sell any personal stock in Progea. Leland and the board agree that this will give a public perception that the company remains a solid investment with unlimited growth potential. Jack says he thought the FDA was rejecting Prexilin, so Margot counters that business is all about perception. The man insists that freezing the retirement savings plans is a bad idea, but the woman advises him to support the CEO's decision if he wants to keep his job. Days later, the conflicted executive attends Dr. Schiller's funeral at the cemetery. One morning, Jack discreetly calls the ethics commission from a payphone to lodge an anonymous complaint. The next day, he watches a news report and learns that the Securities and Exchange Commission, or SEC, is launching a wide-ranging probe into possible ethics violations at Progea, including an investigation into possible insider trading among high-level executives. At the office, Margot informs the man that he's been relieved of his position at the company because they found out that he was the one who called the ethics commission. That afternoon, Jack's ex-fiancée, Fatima, and her girlfriend Alex pay him an unexpected visit. He wonders what she's doing in his apartment since they broke up 4 years ago after she realized that she's attracted to women. So Fatima explains that she wants him to be the father of her child, much to his surprise. At first, the man doesn't think she's serious and says she should find another donor or consider adoption. However, the ex-fiancée counters that she doesn't trust anonymous donor profiles and mentions how difficult it is for 2 women in a relationship to adopt. When Alex states that they'll pay him for his services, Jack realizes that they both want to get pregnant at the same time. Then, Fatima shows him $10,000 and says they need his most recent medical report to make sure that he doesn't have any communicable diseases. Meanwhile, Leland tells fellow CEOs of rival companies through a phone call that the culprit in their crisis is Jack Armstrong. He adds that the wave of corruption and unethical business practices propagated because of the executive's self-serving agenda, and he warns them not to fall for the man's manipulative charm in case he seeks employment from any of them. Later, he lies to the angry employees and says Jack is still an asset to the company and that they shouldn't worry because Prexilin's stock value has nowhere to go but up. The next day, the executive uses an ATM but sees that his account is is unavailable. He goes to the bank and speaks to Clive, who informs him that his account was frozen. Irate, the man raises his voice and says the companies that tried to steal him from Progea won't take his phone calls, and now his account and all his assets are frozen. When he demands that Clive give him his money, the bank employee calls security to drag the man out of the building. Days later, Jack still seems apprehensive about impregnating Fatima, but she reminds him that he no longer has the money to maintain his lavish lifestyle. However, when they're about to do the deed, Alex appears and says she refuses to get pregnant the traditional way, and implies that she isn't comfortable with her girlfriend sleeping with a man. Because Fatima refuses to change her mind, the woman leaves the room and the former lovers do the deed. That evening, Jack talks to his mother Lottie and brother Jamal, and the woman commends him for doing the right thing even though he thinks it wasn't worth it since he lost his job. Then, the man speaks to his father Geronimo, who tells him to keep his head up and get legal representation as soon as possible because he's going against very powerful individuals. Later, Agent Flood from the SEC hands Jack litigation papers, revealing that the Progea executives filed a case against him. The next day, he meets with Gloria, the lawyer his father recommended. That evening, the man overhears Lottie telling Geronimo how tired she is of taking care of him. The patriarch says he didn't ask to have diabetes and he never wanted his wife to spend all her time worrying about him. The woman counters that she's the only person he can count on because Jamal has a wife and child, and all Jack thinks about is making money. Eventually, the son intervenes and Lottie says he wasn't supposed to hear anything they said. Then, he heads to the basement and Geronimo apologizes for the outburst, adding that despite their arguments, he and his wife still love each other deeply. When Jack laments about the state of his life, his father likens his plight to that of Frank Wills, the security guard who discovered the break-in that led to the Watergate scandal and President Nixon's downfall. Later that night, Fatima brings a group of women who require the man's services and are willing to pay $10,000 each. The ex-fiancée says he can earn a lot of money and all she's asking for is a 10% finder's fee. Then, the woman reveals that their initial transaction proved fruitful since she's now with child. In the living room, Nadia shares that she tried adoption multiple times and spent over $50,000. However, all of them fell through, so she decided to have a baby with Jack. When Evelyn asks why a highly educated man is charging women $10,000 for his unique services, Fatima says it's his sideline occupation. After all the clients sign their donor waiver forms and hand their payment to Alex, the woman tells Jack that he's doing the deed with all of them tonight. However, Rachel points out that she needs to see what she is working with before paying $10,000. So the man takes off his clothes and the initially apprehensive client quickly changes her mind. Eventually, Jack does the deed with all the women and adjusts his performance depending on their preferences and comfort levels. In the bathroom, the exhausted man stares at his reflection in the mirror, and the delighted Fatima hands him his hard-earned cash. The next evening, the ex-fiancée brings over another group of clients for Jack, so he takes medication and an energy drink to aid his performance. One night, Fatima arrives to give the man his money and shares that Alex isn't speaking to her because she's pregnant while the girlfriend isn't. Then, the woman admits that she knew as early as high school that she was attracted to women. Annoyed, Jack asks why he had to find out by catching her doing the deed with another woman. So Fatima claims it was her first time and she had to make sure it wasn't just a phase before marrying him. Eventually, she apologizes for causing him pain and embarrassment but says he doesn't have to feel sad that things didn't work out between them because now they'll always be connected since she's having his child. 4 years ago, Jack arrived at the apartment carrying a bouquet of roses. However, to his shock, he found Fatima making passionate love to another woman in their bedroom. The next night, the man welcomes a group of tall, strong women and proceeds to sleep with all of them. Before his final client, he says she might need to come back tomorrow because he's spent, but the woman insists they do it now since she doesn't plan on returning. The next day, the exasperated Alex arrives at the apartment and says the turkey baster method failed and the only way she is getting pregnant is by doing it the traditional way. After the deed, the woman runs into her girlfriend in the hallway who wonders what they were doing while all alone in the apartment. While on a bike ride, Jamal expresses his disapproval of his brother's unusual business venture and points out that he won't be able to raise all the kids. However, Jack explains that he signed a donor agreement form that waives all his parental rights, which means he isn't legally obligated to provide for the children. Nonetheless, Jamal says it's still morally wrong because kids need a father figure in their lives. That night, Alex admits she went to the man's apartment to get pregnant and asks Fatima why she was there. So the girlfriend girlfriend reveals that she still has feelings for her ex-fiancé, but insists that she wants to be with a woman. To assure Alex, Fatima kisses her and they do the deed on top of the kitchen counter. The next day, Margot tells Jack that the company knows all about his side business. Then, he asks the woman to give Leland a letter the next time she sees him. He wonders how she knew about his side hustle, but she says he should be more worried that the company even knows that he's doing it. Margot asks the man to promise that he'll be careful with the endeavor, and he affirms. Afraid that continuing the business might negatively affect his career, Jack declines the newest batch of clients. That night, Simona Bonacera appears at his doorstep and says she'd like to get pregnant because she's the only child of a very important man who wants grandkids. At first, Jack says he no longer impregnates women for money because he realized it's morally and ethically wrong, but the client convinces him eventually. The next day, Leland receives the letter where the former vice president implies that he won't back down against him. Meanwhile, Simona speaks to her father, mafia boss Don Angelo Bonacera, who says that although he doesn't quite understand her relationship with her girlfriend, he's happy that she's pregnant. Later, the mafia boss's lackeys fetch Jack, and Agent Flood takes incriminating photos of the man before he enters Don Angelo's house. Inside, Simona introduces her intimidating father to the donor. In the courtyard, the mafioso mentions that the man signed a donor agreement form that waives all his parental rights to his future grandchildren, and the latter affirms. So Don Angelo says that today will be the last day Jack ever sees his daughter and asks why he started the unusual business. The donor explains that he was in a tight situation, and the mafia boss understands that sometimes people do things despite knowing in their heart that it's wrong. Early the next morning, Agent Flood knocks on Jack's apartment to show him his picture in the newspaper arriving at Don Angelo's house. The older man reminds him that they already got him for insider trading and fraud, so he insists that the only thing he's guilty of is whistleblowing. Nonetheless, Agent Flood takes a pair of handcuffs from his coat pocket and tells Jack that he's under arrest. Outside the apartment building, the disgraced former executive tries to shield his face from the journalists and photographers. At the police station, the cops get Jack's fingerprints and take his mugshot. Later, Gloria visits the man in jail and admonishes him for withholding the fact that he's been impregnating women for money. The woman warns that this information is going to have a substantial negative impact on how the public views his character. For the next few months, the media interviews people from all walks of life and receives varying reactions to the man's controversial side business. While others think what he did was a disgrace to God, others believe what he did was a selfless act since he was helping women achieve their dreams of having children. Soon, Jack is called to court to face 1 count of wire fraud, 2 counts of mail fraud, and 1 count of conspiracy. Judge Buchanan asks the man how he pleads, and he pleads not guilty. The judge sets bail at $5 million, so Gloria argues that the amount is too high. However, the older man says the defendant is a menace to society, and the bail stands. Meanwhile, Margot barges into Leland's office to hand over her resignation letter, and when he says he needs her right now, she walks away. Moments later, the CEO accepts a call from Agent Flood when he learns that he's from the SEC. Eventually, Fatima and Alex visit Jack in jail, and he beams with happiness upon seeing their growing bellies. One day, his family pays him a visit, and Lottie admonishes her son for resorting to a baby-making business instead of simply asking her for money. In his jail cell, the man tapes the monthly ultrasound images of his future kids with Fatima and Alex. In the next few days, Fatima and all of Jack's clients begin giving birth one after the other. One morning, Veda and the 2 women visit the man, and he finally meets his son. Days later, the defendant stands before a committee of the United States Senate in Washington, D.C. Chairman Church asks Jack if he placed the call to the Ethics Commission because he wanted to deceive the financial watchdogs into thinking that unethical business practices in Progea were perpetrated by another person. When he insists that he made the call in earnest, Senator Sweeney says that they possess sworn depositions from his former colleague stating that he knew well in advance that Prexilin would never gain FDA approval. She adds that he worked with Dr. Schiller to intentionally omit key elements of the vaccine's effectiveness. So Jack reveals that the scientist told Progea's board of directors that it only worked on 75% of the test subjects and wanted to delay the release for a year. However, Leland rejected the request and falsified data to try and get the vaccine through the FDA as quickly as possible. The man states that he and Dr. Schiller believe that with sufficient time for further testing, Prexilin would work. Then, Church asks Jack what his personal profit was from the $350 million stock sell-off prior to the FDA's rejection of the vaccine. The defendant says he earned nothing because he had no knowledge whatsoever of the purchase nor the selling of the stock until the scientist took his own life. Moments later, the chairman asks the man about his connection to the Bonacera family, and he admits that he's the father to Simona's twin babies. Church brings up that he impregnated women in exchange for money, and although Jack doesn't deny doing so, he insists that it has nothing to do with the case. Then, the man holds up the DVD and says it's Dr. Schiller's journal, hinting that it contains the proof that'll exonerate him of the crimes. Suddenly, Alex goes into labor, and when Jack tries to help the woman, Church orders the marshals to take him into custody. Days later, Judge Buchanan says the man's been sentenced to 6 months in prison for contempt of a federal hearing. However, he dismisses the charge and says a person with 19 kids needs to be at work and not in jail, much to the crowd's delight. Eventually, Agent Flood arrests the CEO and says he deserves to experience a perp walk so everyone knows he's a criminal. Meanwhile, Don Angelo watches the news report on TV while cradling his grandchildren. Soon, Jack tells Fatima that he still loves her and he'd like to be the man in the couple's lives and the father to their children. With the mutual affection they share for Alex, the trio begins a three-way relationship to complete their unconventional but happy family. As for his 17 other children, Jack maintains a healthy friendship with all his former clients. While Geronimo proudly looks on, the man enjoys a lovely picnic at the beach with his family.
Subscribe to watch more videos like this, turn on notifications and leave a like to help the channel out. Thank you for watching.